Hello and welcome back for another Sheriff of Studying video. It's time for another mailbag. This one was inspired especially by two lengthy messages that I've gotten over the past several weeks, but really the question I'm going to answer is an amalgam not just of those two questions, but of several other very similar questions that I've gotten over the years. The circumstances are always different, but the general issue is the same. It's some version of I'm in trouble in my medical school or my residency program and I might be kicked out. What do I do? So in this video, I'm going to answer that question. And when I do, there's a certain context that I'm assuming. There's a good number of medical students or residents who have some kind of issue during their training. Maybe it's an academic issue or a professionalism issue or a clinical performance issue. But whatever it is, the concerns are legitimate and the person goes through some process of probation or mediation or whatever with their school or their program. And everything's fair and everything works out as intended. The institution does their part, the trainee does their part, and it certainly is not any fun for the person who has to go through it, but in the end, things work out. Now, if that's your situation, this video is not really for you. I think I may still say some things that'll be applicable to your situation and may be useful to you nonetheless. But my advice here is really for people whose circumstances are a little different. It's for trainees who've gotten into a situation where they believe that they're getting screwed. They think that the issues that land them in trouble are not true, or at least they're not completely true, and that the processes have been unfair or even malicious, and they seem to be leading to this predetermined adverse outcome. So for the rest of this video, I'm going to give those of you who are in these kinds of awful situations 6 pieces of advice. But before I do, I got to tell you where I'm coming from. First, if you ask me for advice, what I'm going to do is I'm honestly going to try to put myself in your shoes. And I really try to think about knowing what I know now about medicine and medical training and human beings and the way the world works and drawing off whatever experience and perspective I've gained by doing this stuff for a little while. What would I do if I woke up with my brain in your shoes? And obviously, I'm not you. I got my own values and biases and perceptions of risks and rewards, and those are probably all different than yours. So if you don't want to take my advice, don't. It won't hurt my feelings. You got to do what's best for you. Just understand that whatever it is I'm telling you is really and truly what I think I'd do if I were you. The second thing you got to remember is because of some of the stuff that I talk about, I hear from lots of different people. And let me tell you, I hear the shittiest stories. I hear about the people whose programs failed them, the people who suffered through different types of abuse and mistreatment, where the protections in the system failed and they got retaliated against when they spoke up, and then they got kicked to the curb. And sadly, that's actually the point when I usually hear from these people once the damage has already been done and their once bright career path has disappeared or at least been very dimmed, and they've already been kicked out. So if you're asking this question sooner and you have the ability to avoid that kind of catastrophic outcome, and you come to me asking for advice, well, the things I'm saying to you, they are informed by my knowledge of the perils that lie ahead of you. Remember, I hear the shittiest stories, and I don't want you to become one of them. So here's my advice. Number one, be honest with yourself. By its very nature, trying to dismiss a student or resident is an adversarial process. If you're on the receiving end of that, it is very understandable for you to see ill intent in every interaction that you have with your school or your program. And I want to believe that many people in medical education are in it for the right reasons. And it really brings them joy to see young doctors grow and develop. And honestly, I think that's true for many people. But for some others, it's just a job that gets them out of clinic, or it's a line on their CV, or it's a stepping stone to some other administrative position even farther away from patient care, and their main interest isn't doing anything in particular for learners. It's just advancing themselves in their own career and serving the institution's priorities. So if you see ill intent in every interaction, it's possible you're right. I mean, I've seen situations in which trainees were set up to fail, and their whole remediation process or appeal hearing was just a sham. The decision to get rid of them was already made. There was no changing it, but there the administrators were, posturing reasonably and wearing their plastered on smiles and checking checky boxes on their policy forms as they asked the trainee to jump through more hoops, as if any of that was going to change anything. But still, even in those cases, what gets things started in these kinds of situations? It's something legitimate. Maybe it's overblown or overstated or misunderstood. But the concern that first gets the trainee in trouble is something that a school or residency program should legitimately be concerned about. But unfortunately, when the trainee is confronted about it, the trainee perceives they're being treated unfairly and their future livelihood is at risk, and they go into survival mode. And some people, when they're in this life or death, fight or flight mode, when they perceive that they're in imminent danger and it's the program director or dean that's putting them in that danger, well, they're immediately and totally opposed to anything that comes out of that person's mouth or anyone else's mouth who might be speaking on their behalf, and they can't acknowledge that there could even be a single grain of truth in it. And that is a dangerous place for you to be. Like I said, there are cases where it's absolutely appropriate for you to be deeply suspicious of the motives of your school or program, and you need to absolutely consider that angle when you're determining how you should respond. But in your quiet moments, when no one's around, you got to be honest with yourself. And even if you're being treated unfairly, and even if whatever got things started was misunderstood or overblown, you've still got to be able to see that there may be some truth in it. So when it's quiet and there's no one around, think about the facts of your situation and see what parts someone was upset about that may be true. And then you need to address those things. I mean, maybe it was taken out of context, but maybe you shouldn't have said the thing that you said. Or maybe there's some extenuating circumstances that the school isn't taking into consideration, but yeah, you shouldn't have been late for that thing. Maybe there's more to the story than people know, but yeah, maybe you should have tried harder to let people know when you were sick and wouldn't be at work. Whatever it is that got things started, and whatever things since then have kept them going, you got to be able to be honest with yourself about them and what it is that you need to do for the future. And I say that for three very important reasons. One is that you want to be successful. And if you can get yourself out of this scrape, you don't want it to happen again. And maybe you got some things you can improve upon. And, there's no shame in admitting that, especially to yourself, like I said, in a quiet moment when no one else is looking. And if you're honest with yourself and you think maybe you'd benefit from some counseling to help you with anxiety or to process old trauma, or you think that maybe you're drinking more than you wish that you were, or maybe you're not using your Adderall in the way that you should be, or maybe you've gotten into a relationship with someone who's abusive and you need to get out of it, then please, please take the steps that you need to do to make things better. This is your life and you want to enjoy it and you want to be a blessing to those around you, but you got to start by being honest with yourself. Reason number two is that the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes, it's an honest to God physician skill. And you'll be a better doctor by practicing it every once in a while. It's not a natural thing to do. Everything that happens in our lives, we see only through the live stream that's rolling in our own eyes and brain. There's never been a single episode of anything in your life where you weren't the main character. But you're not the main character in anyone else's life. They're all seeing things through their own live stream, and the way that you view yourself is not necessarily the way that others see you. You got to realize that, and you ought to practice trying to look through someone else's live stream and see what they may see. Because it'll help you in the situation that you're in. And even if it doesn't, rehearsing putting yourself in someone else's shoes will still make you a better doctor. And the third and final reason is that even if you're totally being railroaded by your program or by your school, and there's no truth in anything they're saying, and you aren't interested in rehearsing empathy, it still is going to benefit you to see things the way that they see them. And the reason why is it will help you with strategy. So do this little mental exercise for me. It may be uncomfortable, but I want you to do it. Imagine for a moment that you got hired as the prosecuting attorney for the school or for the program. And your job now is to make the case against you, to freaking nail you to the wall. How would you do it? What would your argument be? What are the things that you'd say with the knowledge that you have to justify kicking you out? If you're honest with yourself when you do this exercise, you'll start to see the battlefield the way that they see it. And you'll start to see where some of your positions may be vulnerable, either right now or in the future. And it will help you make better decisions as the process plays out. And that leads me to my second piece of advice, which is just do the thing. Now, I say this advice because in several of these situations, surprisingly, the final conflict comes down over an issue that really is relatively small. What I mean is the trainee is being asked to do something that isn't that big of a lift, but they really believe on principle that they should not have to do that thing. And they take a principled stance and they dig in their heels, and eventually the school or the program draws a line in the sand, and that's the end of it. I'd like to give you precise examples of the kind of thing I'm talking about, but I don't think I can without violating confidentiality because each one of these sort of situations is sort of unique. So instead, I'm going to give you a real life example from my own personal educational history. And obviously, this one didn't result in me getting kicked out of school, but if I'd stuck to my guns, I don't know, it might could have. And honestly, it taught me a valuable lesson, even though I don't think I fully appreciated it at the time. The circumstances, as best I can recall, were these. It was the fourth year of medical school, and in between our electives, we had a few sessions that we had to attend, and attendance at these things was mandatory. And we had this session on pain management and palliative care. And as a side note, I got to say it's interesting to reflect on this now because, when I attended medical school was back in the era when, in response to efforts by Purdue Pharma and others, medical students were taught how the pain score was the fifth vital sign and how every patient with pain, they needed morphine or OxyContin. And until or unless their pain score dropped or they developed respiratory depression, you ought to keep giving more of it. And so when I look back on this anecdote now, I kind of wonder why that session was a mandatory session in the first place and what kind of donor or accrediting agency or entity we were trying to please by doing that. But I digress. Back to the story. We were all sitting around in this classroom and listening to the lecture, and there was this paper sign-in sheet that got passed around. The only thing was the way people were sitting was kind of scattered in a haphazard pattern. So the sign-in sheet couldn't just move from one row to the other. It sometimes had to skip a row and loop back. And I saw this thing being passed around, but it didn't get to where I was sitting, and I didn't sign it. And neither did the person that was sitting next to me. So a few days later, I got an email from the course director saying that since I hadn't attended this mandatory session, I needed to do a makeup assignment. And it was some kind of light reading and writing assignment. I think we were supposed to read a JAMA article and summarize the key takeaway points on pain management in 250 words or something like that. But I emailed back and said, well, actually, I had been at the session, and thus began a series of email exchanges in which I pointed out that I recalled quite well the structure and content of the lecture and the details about who was sitting where, and I provided a list of classmates who had been sitting nearby or who I'd spoken to who might be able to verify my presence at the lecture. But despite providing these pieces of information, I was nonetheless repeatedly invited to complete this 250-word writing assignment, and I repeatedly declined to do so since from my standpoint, I had in fact been at the lecture, and I felt that no makeup assignment of any kind should be required. So the next email I got was from my dean of students, who kindly requested my company in his office to discuss this issue further. So I went in there all hot and I argued my case and I offered various evidentiary threads for why I was actually present and I should be marked as such. And I closed with the assertion that, as a matter of principle, I would not lie and say that I wasn't there and do this makeup assignment. And I got to give my dean credit. He listened very kindly to all of this. My dean, he was one of the folks who got into medical education for the right reasons. And he looked at me and he said, I believe you, but it doesn't matter. And he went on to gently explain how this is just simply how many things in medicine and in life work. You gauge attendance by the names that are on the sign-in sheet, and mine wasn't on it. And the same thing was going to be true for lots of things in my future life as a physician. If I saw a patient but didn't write a note, I might as well have not seen him. If I did my CME but I didn't submit my credit form, it wouldn't matter. I shouldn't have just wasted my time. And I did not like what he was saying, but either I recognized the truth in it or I pragmatically evaluated my options and I decided that this was not the hill that I wanted to die on. So I read the article and I wrote my 250 words and I went on my merry way, which is why I'm able to tell you this story now as a physician in practice. So if any part of this resembles your situation, and there's something that you're being asked to do that you think is unnecessary or even unjust, but it's not that big of a thing, my advice to you is just do the thing. Make up the time you missed. Repeat the rotation. Retake the test. Do your mandatory training modules. Sign your delinquent notes in the EMR. Meet with the guy they said you need to meet with. Whatever it is, if it's not that big of a deal, just do the thing. Moving on, my third piece of advice. Mind your P's and Q's. At first, this one may seem obvious or maybe even patronizing. But I'm saying it because I know of quite a few cases in which trainees were dismissed and the general circumstances went something like this. The trainee found themselves in hot water over something legitimate, maybe a performance issue or some kind of misconduct. I mean, the precise details don't really matter. What matters is they were going to get a second chance. Maybe that's because the school showed some leniency. Maybe they got off on appeal or managed some other way to get out of trouble. And they were going to get out of the hole they were in until they got caught up in something else. And that something else wouldn't have been a big deal, except that it happened while they were on probation, or they managed to make someone really important angry at them when they got off for their first offense. And so once they got another shot at them, they were going to nail them to the wall. So on the one hand, it feels like, they're kicking me out for this little infraction that other people get away with all the time. But in reality, you're not getting kicked out just for that little thing, but for whatever else came before it. So if you're listening to this video because you found yourself in hot water at your school residency program and you're working through that process, please mind your P's and Q's. Don't take extra meal tickets when you're on call, even if you get hungry and you want a little snack. Don't wear flip-flops or a t-shirt to clinic, even if it's your personal style. Don't badge in your friend for a lecture that they didn't attend. Don't park in parking spots that are reserved for patients. Don't put your university credentials into Sci-Hub. Don't call out sick and then post pictures of yourself on Snapchat of you attending a concert later that day. Don't take snacks from the attending physician's lounge if someone has specifically instructed you not to do that. Don't send a joke text message with a fake consult request to the surgery chief resident, just for lols. Don't Photoshop your attending's head onto a photograph that you then use in your morning report PowerPoint. Don't pass go and collect $200. Don't fake the funk on a nasty dunk. I could go on, but the bottom line is if you've been in trouble before, just don't. Individually, these are not horrible crimes. They're not that serious. They range from ill-considered but mostly harmless to things that could actually make a reasonable person question your character and suitability for a career as a physician. But individually, the things that I just mentioned, they probably wouldn't be punished all that severely if they were a one-off. But if you were already in trouble, you may get the death penalty. If you're going through probation or mediation or face some adverse action from your school or employer, you need to walk the straight and narrow. Mind your P's and Q's. Live a boring life. Take care of this. Move on. And enjoy a career where you're going to be generously compensated and you'll have the opportunity on a daily basis to make a positive impact on someone's life. And now it's time for my fourth piece of advice. But before I get into that, I guess I should say why some folks reach out to me when they're in these situations. And I think some people have reached out to me in the hope that I would publicize their story, and that if I did, then the school or the program would back down, or that maybe I know some kind of loophole that may get them out of the situation they're in. But if you follow me, you may have noticed I haven't ever written or tweeted about these cases. And it's not to say I never would, but I haven't seen a situation where I thought that me doing that would do the person a bit of good. And unfortunately, I don't know any cheat codes either. And actually, the biggest piece of advice that I have for you, it may not be what you were wanting to hear, but that piece of advice is this: policies are your best protection. This piece of advice applies even if you don't want or need the piece of advice that I've given so far. And I'll be honest, a lot of folks don't. They've been honest with themselves. They've done the thing. They're minding their P's and Q's. Their problem is not a lack of insight or foolish pride or some silly mistake. Their problem is that they're being muscled or coerced out of their future career, and it's been unfair. Maybe they rubbed their PD the wrong way. Maybe they spoke out truthfully against someone important, and now they're being punished for doing so. And when you're in that kind of situation and you see the injustice and you feel the walls closing in around you, it is natural that you would look to certain places to help. But unfortunately, most of the places that you want to turn, that feel like they could or should right the injustice, they won't be much help to you. For instance, it's natural for residents to want help from the ACGME. And I mean, if their residency program is corrupt, they want to bring it down. And truth be told, I want you to bring it down. But the ACGME still may not be that much help to you for several reasons. First, unless there's other residents that are willing to speak up, it may not seem like a systemic issue, and a body like the ACGME may be reluctant to intervene. I mean, if you're the only person who says they've been wronged or the only person willing to speak up, the program will say, "Oh, the complaint came from her? Hmm." And then they'll just go on to explain, very reasonably how you're a resident who's gotten into some disciplinary trouble lately, and they'll make you out to be a disgruntled, soon-to-be former resident who's just trying to get back at their program. Thing number two is the ACGME is not a police agency. They don't have any kind of investigative power. They can't get a search warrant. They're not going to break down the program director's door with a battering ram and seize their computer and throw them up against the wall and take their cell phone so they can figure out who did what and when. What they'll do is they'll send some emails and they'll ask people to meet with them. And if that person chooses to meet with them, they'll ask them some questions. And if they ask those questions and the person says, "Oh, nah, it didn't happen like that," well, the investigation may just reach an impasse. Third reason is that the ACGME's time frame is unpredictable. There could be a significant delay between the time that they notify the program there's been a complaint and they're going to investigate it and the time they actually show up to begin that investigation. Or there may be a significant delay between the time they investigate and the time that they make some determination about what to do about it. And you may not have that much time. And even if you did, waiting around within the program while all this plays out, it's going to be uncomfortable. Now, you can make anonymous complaints to the ACGME, but even if you do, the nature of what you're complaining about will likely make it clear to anyone who thinks about it who the complainer was. And that may expose you to even more harm. It's also natural to think that the courts may help you. I mean, this is America, and the court is where you go for justice and to punish wrongdoers. But for most cases, the courts are not really going to be able to help you. For one thing, they're slow. If you follow me on X, you may have seen last week I posted about a lawsuit that a resident filed against their former employer. That resident was dismissed from his residency program in 2017, and his lawsuit just got dismissed this summer in 2023. So he spent 6 years of his life dealing with lawyers and courtrooms and legal paperwork, and in the end, his case did not even make it to trial. The power differential between a trainee and their program is already enormous, and it may get magnified when attorneys get involved. Because on one side, you got a major institution that may have $1 billion a year of revenue, and they got white shoe law firms on retainer. And on the other side, there's you. And so unless you got unusually deep pockets, it may be impossible for you to pursue the case because unless your situation is very unusual and you can really allege significant damages, an attorney is not going to be willing to take your case on contingency just hoping for a big payout. They're going to charge you by the hour. Now, none of this is to say that you shouldn't talk to an attorney. In fact, I'd say that if you're being screwed over by your program, you absolutely should. But you need to talk to someone who knows what they're doing. And if you do, they'll give you a realistic view of what you're up against and what grounds for lawsuits could be. And in most of these cases, if you talk to a knowledgeable and honest attorney, you're going to realize that the daydreams you have about seeing the program director stammer while you cross-examine him in court, they're just daydreams. I'm saying this to make the point that what you really want, you want to resolve this problem without filing a lawsuit or going to court, if that's at all possible. So the thing you need to understand very clearly then is that your own institution's policies, they are your best protection. In the United States, at least, it's not easy to dismiss a medical student or a resident. Now, every hospital or school is different, but they all have policies and procedures that have to be followed. The exact steps vary, but the general gist of it is that you have to be informed, usually in writing, that a disciplinary or corrective action is being taken against you and it could result in you getting dismissed. And you generally have to be informed of your rights and the expectations of you. And there generally is some kind of hearing or at least a specific date on which your situation and progress is going to be reviewed. And if an adverse action gets taken against you, you almost always have some kind of appeal process within the institution. So like I said, all this varies from place to place. So I can't give you any precise advice on the particular policies at your institution, but I can emphasize to you in this video, I can emphasize to you in the strongest possible terms that you need to learn the policies that govern your situation because they are your best protection. And actually, if you end up pursuing a legal strategy, this is the kind of thing that the courts are most likely to be interested in. There aren't many judges who are going to want to jump in and overrule the subjective judgment of the dean or program director if they come in there and say that you're not meeting the standards. But almost all judges will make sure that the institution honors their agreements with you and follows their own institutional procedures. So what you need to do is you need to dig up the student handbook or you need to get online and review the policies so that you know precisely what is supposed to happen and when. And when you do, you may find that those procedures haven't been followed. Students and residents, they don't typically get dismissed very often, and administrators sometimes get careless about dotting their I's and crossing their T's when these situations do come up. And if you note that at the right time and in the right way and with the right audience, it may be enough to stop the momentum that's been working against you and prompt some reconsideration of your situation. And with that, I come to my fifth piece of advice, which is document everything. We live in a world of pics or it didn't happen. And obviously, I'm not saying you need to wear a body cam, but you do need to make sure that everything that happens to you, especially as it relates to this disciplinary action, is truthfully documented. If you live in a one-party consent state like I do, you should record all your meetings with program officials, deans, just so that you have an objective record of who said what and when. Now, if you live in a state like California or Michigan or Florida or a handful of other two-party consent states, then you have to have permission from the person who's being recorded. And depending on your situation, you could consider asking them for consent. If you do, I would recommend framing it in a non-confrontational way. The goal is for you to have a record that you could refer to later. And you could even share a copy of the recording with them if they want, if you try to go this route. But in many cases, it may make things even more adversarial to ask about this. And so your best bet may be to take careful notes or to summarize key things that came out in the verbal meeting in an email that you send later to the person that you're meeting with. My point is, though, do not leave this to memory. You need to preserve all written communications. Now, you may say, oh, no problem. I got them all saved in my email. But, buddy, you need to understand that if you're fired, your email access is going to disappear instantly. So make sure that you forward anything that you need to another account where you're going to maintain access. Same thing goes for important policies. Some of those things are online, but they're behind an institutional firewall that's password protected. So if you lose your hospital or university login, all that stuff is now inaccessible to you. It's probably also in your best interest, depending on the nature of your situation, to keep a very brief journal or logbook of where you were and when and certain key dates and events, because again, I promise all of this will become very muddled over time, and you may be caught off guard by something in the future if you don't keep yourself organized. At the same time, though, don't let documentation run your life. And unfortunately, in some cases, students and residents take this to the extreme because they feel those walls closing in around them and they go into panic mode. And it ends up making their interactions unnecessarily adversarial and it hurts their work or their school performance. You need to document everything, but you also need to play it cool. Don't focus so much on playing defense that you forget to play offense. Make sure that you're doing your best work in all of the things that people are asking you to do. And now I'm up to my sixth and final piece of advice, which is take care of yourself. If you found yourself in trouble with your school or your residency program, it sucks. To get into medical school or residency, it requires an incredible input of time and hard work. And when that's in jeopardy for whatever reason, it's going to activate your sympathetic nervous system. So don't go through this alone. Lean on the people who love you, whether that's your significant other, or your friends, or your parents. If you don't have those people, or actually even if you do, you probably will benefit from having someone else to help you with this load. Talk to a therapist to help with this kind of trauma. Talk to an attorney or an advisor who has your best interests in heart to help you with strategy and make sure that you're looking at things the right way. And if people who love you and care about you tell you to do something differently than the way you've been doing it, you need to take their advice seriously. And if people who love you and care about you want to help you in whatever way they can, let them. And I want you to remember this too. Even if you've reached the end of the road with your appeals, um, you have not reached the end of the road for you. A career in medicine is a good thing. And if that's what you want, I want you to have it. And that's why I made this video for you in the hopes that maybe some of these things will catch someone at the right time that it'll help them. But if you don't have a career in medicine, it's not the end of the road. You know, these days you hear about people leaving medicine all the time for different reasons. At the end of the day, it's a job. And there's a lot of jobs out there, especially for someone with the talent and skills to get into medical school. My point is, this is a setback on your journey. It's not your final destination. It's not hopeless, and it's not worth your life. So if that's how you're feeling, I want you to pick up your phone right now and dial 988 and start talking to someone who can help. For the students and residents who are facing these struggles, I wish you all the best. And for everyone else who came along for the ride today, thanks for listening. That's all I've got.